Bună ziua tuturor! Sunt Cristian Hostuc, directorul editorial al ziarului financiar și în această seară în această după-amiază voi fi moderatorul acestei întâlniri, acestei conferințe CEO Survey PWC 2021, în care vom celebra și 30 de ani de PWC în România. Este o bucurie pentru mine și cred că pentru toată lumea să ne reîntâlnim aici după un an și, 3 luni de zile în care am trăit cu toții această pandemie. Vom trage linia peste ani, ce a fost în această perioadă, dar mă bucur că, cum să spunem așa, am supraviețuit și cred că România a supraviețuit destul de bine aceste perioade, chiar mult mai bine decât ne-am fi așteptat în martie 2020. Așa cum a spus și Ionuț, vom fi gazdele voastre, gazdele dumneavoastră o oră în care vom discuta nu neapărat trecutul, ci ce ne așteaptă în viitor, pentru că sunt foarte multe semne de întrebare, chiar am și aici în discuțiile individuale, toată lumea se întreabă ce va fi în toamnă, ce va fi anul viitor, cât va ține această creștere economică. Bun, acum, aceasta a fost introducerea mea. Ionuț, în calitate de gazdă. Ionuț sunt eu, country manager PWC România.
Bună ziua tuturor și vă mulțumesc foarte mult că ați venit și pentru că avem invitați care sunt vorbitori nativi de limba engleză. O să-mi permit să trec în limba engleză. Sunt sigur că o să acceptați acest lucru, iar discuția noastră o să se decurgă foarte bine. So thank you very much all for being today with us. We are going to have the third time presentation of the CEO survey here in Romania. We planned to have one last year, end of March, but then the pandemic crisis changed it all. So Nick, thank you very much for being again with us. Nick Koch is our regional CEO, and he was here present for the launch of CEO every time he had the opportunity. Of course, together with us, we have two very esteemed CEOs, and I will start with Cristina Verșere, the CEO of OMV Petrom, together with Sergiu Manea, the CEO of BCR Erste Bank. Thank you very much all, and Fini, you are the master of ceremony. Actually, every session or every event of this nature was done in your presence, so you are our good karma.
I
guess
so.
not. I guess not. You can be our good karma. So if it's not raining tonight, which is not, God spoke to him that is not going to be unless it lasts less than an hour. So we need to finish in an hour.
Okay, thank you very much.
Fini, back to you.
Nikos is currently CEO PWC Central and Eastern Europe. He is responsible for 29 countries. He worked for PWC for 30 years. So your floors is yours.
Okay. So, thank you very much. I don't know if I have a slide changer. I guess I don't. So, first of all, it's great to be back. It's been a couple of years. Unfortunately, we had the gap in the middle. It's always exciting, I think, to come to Bucharest. And we're sure that this is one of the most dynamic capitals in Central and Eastern Europe. And as I know, things are going very well within Romania this year, better than expected. And I think that gives us, when we look at the CEO survey, a degree of cautious optimism. And I think if I use the words cautious and optimistic through this presentation, it will help to describe, I think, a little bit about where we feel this comes out. But also, I think it's time for action. So I think the word action is also another very important word for us. So, not quite sure where we're on slides. I think we've gone too far. Yeah, we've gone too far forward. Maybe we need to go back. So in terms of the CEO survey, we do this every year. It's the 24th CEO survey that we've done globally. We've had 5,000 CEOs taking part, and in CEE, I'm very pleased to say that we've had about 687 CEOs taking part in the survey. And it gives us a very good indication of the thoughts of CEOs about how they're going to drive their business forward post-pandemic, what they're going to do in terms of ensuring the stability and the success of their businesses. It gives us a great insight to that. And when we look at it, as I said, there is cause for optimism. So if we look at probably the next slide, it's a year since the WHO announced that we were going to have, that we were in the course of this pandemic. And what's very interesting for us to see is that 3/4 of CEOs globally are very optimistic about both the global and the local economies. And that's a record high. That's about 20 percentage points above the previous record highs that we've had. So that's very, very encouraging. In our region, almost 2/3 of CEOs feel very optimistic about the global economy and the local economy, which is also a record high. And it's more than double last year's, okay. This one moves it forward, okay, sorry about that. So it's more than double last year's rate of 24%. But also if we look at CEE, the level of optimism is one of the lowest in the 8 regions that we carry out this survey. And even that level of optimism, I think, in CEE and globally must be taken with a pinch of salt, because really the question is this optimism driven by the fact that we are in the hope of a return to normal, rather than we've eliminated or reduced the fundamental challenges that business is facing. Okay, so there's, I assume, quite a bit of a boost from the hope and the expectation that we're now coming out of this pandemic. But as I said, this level of caution is pretty typical for us in CEE. And the reasons for that are revealed within the CEO survey as well. So we can see that in CEE, we go back one, sorry. So in CEE, when we look at the global firm, when we look at CEE, 1 in 20 CEOs are looking at new strategic alliances or JVs versus 38% globally. Also in M&A, the same 20% are looking at M&A versus a 35% globally. So, in fact, out of all of the 8, I think, areas that drive growth that we've asked CEOs about, there's only 1 where CEE leads the way. And that's only by 1%, in fact. Yeah, and that's where we seek operational efficiencies. Now, maybe part of the reason is that in CEE, about 3 out of 10 of our CEOs have been in position since the last crisis. About 1/3 of the CEOs have been in position since the last crisis, 2008, which is significantly higher than the global number of about 19%. So while they may know their organizations really well and what's to be expected in a situation like this and how to deal with a pandemic, it's also quite likely they are a little bit more cautious in terms of their efforts. But I think there's also some other factors that influence the CEO's approach in CEE, and that's the threat profile. So if we look globally, the pandemic has reordered the threat profile that CEOs see, right? So no surprise that health crises are top of the list in terms of that. But actually in CEE, we exceed the average and the extreme concern in a number of areas that are not quite so obvious at a global level. So geopolitics, exchange rate volatility, and the future of the EU. And I guess geopolitics, it's not surprising that that's a concern of ours in CEE. Within the region that I operate, we have border conflicts. We have a potential change in the US policy towards our region. We have often conflicts between the EU and our new member states. And of course we need to respond to China as an investor and a trader. So those are serious concerns in that regard. In CEE, our executives are much more concerned and more anxious about their Western European peers about the future of the Eurozone at 20%. And that's about twice the global rate of 10%. And that's a reflection, I guess, of how important Western Europe is for our markets, underlined again by the fact that Germany is seen as the most important country for growth for CEE, with 3 out of 10 CEOs looking at that as the most important country for growth. And I guess also we see, many of our territories see the single currency as really a political and an economic anchor for us to the West. So I think while these factors probably fairly predict a cautious wait and see approach for many of our CEOs, I think there's still an opportunity for us to focus on the things that organizations can influence. It's pretty difficult for a company, I think, to influence the geopolitical balance. But for the CEOs here today, I think it's not only important, but it's also possible for us to influence factors such as cyber threats and also the ESG scenario. So those are things that I think we can actually influence. Our impact on climate, our impact on cyber threats. And so probably we should focus more on the things that we can do something about. What's encouraging to see, I think, is a shift in executives thinking around the availability of key skills. So CEOs in the region are more concerned about this than their global peers, 82% against 72%. But I think what's very encouraging is they're not just worried about this, but they're actually doing something about it as well. So we can see that CEOs are adjusting, 40% of CEOs are adjusting their workforce strategy to improve competitiveness by including automation and also improving workforce engagement and communications is up to 39%. So I think for sure our CEOs have seen the importance of taking care of our people, looking after their needs. I think that's something that's really important, and I think as we should say, I think that's a sign of really good leadership when we look after the concerns of our people. The next step, of course, is to extend this concern and this attitude of care beyond the walls of the company. And so in CEE, we can see that 63% of our executives are making or considering changes to their organizational purpose, so how they influence society, and to better reflect that role. And that's significantly higher than what we see on a global level at 43%. Slightly less than 50% plan to increase investments in sustainability and ESG initiatives over the next 3 years. And while it's behind the global level, I think certainly it's a pretty good start. Sorry, I'm jumping into yours. I'm getting greedy. So when we look at this overall, and maybe I would conclude in saying that the CEO survey for us has always been a great predictor of what is expected to come in the economy and within our businesses. And if we go back to 2019, our CEO survey certainly predicted an economic downturn. And I think that helped us prepare a little bit for something that was quite different. Nobody could have predicted the pandemic. And I think that when we look at the outcome of this, we've come through it quite well. I think as CEOs, we've got a really good understanding of what our organization needs in terms of preparation for economic shocks, what we need to do to come out stronger and sustainably better. And in many ways, I like to think that instead of going through a long, hard winter, a long, drawn-out economic crisis, we came through quite a severe snowstorm. And from my perspective, I think that sets us up really well to progress into the future and to take our organizations forward, making a difference within the space of, for example, ESG and diversity, and leading to more robust and more successful organizations. So I look forward to discussing that a little bit more in the panel later, and I'll leave my comments there. Thank
Nick,
you.
before I pass the microphone to Ionuț, what is your answer? How Romanian doing so well in this crisis?
Well, I think probably across all of Central Europe, there is a degree of, the robust nature of maybe it's our mentality and our organizations, and we see that coming through. So the way we've responded has been very balanced. I think it's been, we've remained positive within our organizations. I think we've been sensible in terms of the regulations that we've imposed within our economies and within our businesses. So that's helped keep, I think, people calm and balanced. I think within our firm, what we try to do, and I think we've seen this across the region in terms of the government's response, is primarily, of course, to keep people safe and keep our clients and our people safe and informed. I think most of us have probably managed to maintain employment. I think that's been really important. So we haven't had that sort of knee-jerk reaction, which could have been very damaging, I think, to all of our economies. And we've looked at the situation, and I think we've adapted really well. So for an organization like ours, and we were talking about it earlier as well, people have been working remotely on and off, but primarily for the last 15 months or so. And we've managed to continue to deliver, I think, quality and value to our clients. And I think we've accelerated some of the things that we were planning to do anyway, whether it's digital upskilling, automating some of the business we've done. So I think the fact that we haven't reacted too aggressively or whatever, I think we've remained calm. Probably in this part of the world, we're used to challenges, right? And so I think that level of sort of calmness, this practical approach to it has served everybody very, very well, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Ionuț?
Once again,
CEO survey for Romanian.
yes. Once again, good afternoon, everybody. I realize now that I try to figure out the mystery of a foreign language. Every time I have to make a presentation in Romanian, I find the right words in English. But every time I have to make a presentation in English, all the right words in Romanian come to my mind. So I truly apologize for my rongleză, which I'm going to speak this afternoon, especially for the native English speakers. Now, when I read this survey first time, I didn't understood a clue. I didn't understand a clue because it's so complex, it's so many numbers. But then in time, with the help of my colleague Cristi Tomescu, I started to understand what is this all about. Nick said it gives a perspective. In itself, so and so, because if you see the results of last year, doesn't say anything about what happened this year. Nevertheless, if you look at the trends, then you truly get an image. So when I will go through the presentation for Romania, please keep in mind the trends as well. Now, the key findings for Romania, you have to understand one thing, is the 24th edition of the CEO survey, however, is the 10th edition of Romania, another celebration today. And for Romania, we had 174 participants, which placed Romania at global level on the 4th place, after Canada, UK, and US. What says this? It says that it matters to us. We wanted to voice out, you wanted to voice out your concerns, and I thank you very much for this because it's an absolutely outstanding achievement. Now, there are several topics which I want to share with you today. What is the opinion of the Romanian CEO with regards to the sentiment about the economic growth, overall economic growth? What the CEOs believe about their own revenue, their own organization's revenue growth? What are the actions they need to take in order to drive that revenue growth? what are the investments they need to make, and then what are the resources they need to allocate in order to achieve those objectives. So this is what is this study all about today. And at the end, we are going to talk a bit about concerns and a bit the interaction between CEOs and the government. Nick already said that in CEE, the optimism is high, but yet lower than the global level, 64% versus 76%. Now, in Romania, it's even lower, it's 60%. So 60% of those CEOs who were interviewed believe that this year we will have a better economic situation than the year before. Nevertheless, even though it's less than Central Eastern Europe and global, if you can see, it's better than the previous years, which means that the optimism, it's overwhelmingly positive. Now, on the question what they think about their own organization's revenue growth, you will see that 39% of the Romanian CEOs believe that their own organization's revenue will grow. And this is more or less in the next 12 months. And this is more or less in line with what the other CEOs believe at CE and global level. However, when it comes to 3 years perspective, 51% of the Romanian CEOs believe they will have a higher revenue growth in their organizations. And this places Romania on top of global and Central Eastern Europe. So please, let's party later afternoon because you have reasons to, and we pay for it. Can you imagine that? Now, the question is, what kind of actions the CEOs need to take in order to continue to drive this revenue growth? Now, in these times of uncertainty regarding the speed of recovery. Now, 74% of the CEOs believe in Romania that this requires to seek operational efficiencies. And then this is in line with what the other CEOs, global and CE, believe. And also when it comes to pursue revenue growth, 60% of CEOs believe that, and this is in line with what the others think. So the Romanian CEOs put faith in what they can do to ensure the growth of their company revenue. Nevertheless, when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, when it comes to strategic alliances, only 17% of the Romanian CEOs, which is less than half of the global CEOs, believe can be a mean to drive revenue growth. So yes, well, I was about to name the party. There was a party in history said through ourselves. So what we can do ourselves is what matters for the future. Now, the question was, what are you going to invest in order to ensure this growth? Now, looking ahead for the next 3 years, 85% of the Romanian CEOs would like to invest in the digital transformation of their companies. And you see there are two colors, yellow and brown, I guess, whatever that color is, dark yellow. 53% of the CEOs will allocate more than 10% investments of their investments in digital transformation, while 32% will do an investment between 3 to 9%. The next one is investment in achieving cost efficiencies, and this is about 83%. And it will continue for the Romanian CEOs, around 35–37% of them believe they need to invest in leadership and talent development, as well as cyber and data protection. And keep in mind that cyber and data protection is one of the biggest concerns at global level, as Nick already mentioned. People. I remember last year that I said, well, now we can hire. Now we can find people on the market. It's no longer be that kind of situation whereby you give them an offer and they know there is no reply. They say, well, I have 3 or 4, so I better stay home. Why? Because there is place to work whenever I want. The thing is that this survey, which was run in month of January and February, says that 46% of the Romanian CEOs believe they will increase the number of their workforce. Now, this is less than global or CE. Global, you see, it's, 44, 42. So it's better, but it's less, it's better than the global, but it's less than what the Romanian CEOs believed in the last years. So you see, in the last years was in the range of 53%. What kind of actions the CEO should take when it comes to workforce strategy in order to drive the competitiveness of their own organization? At this question, 41% of the CEOs believe that they need to focus on increasing the productivity through automation and technology. And this in itself is higher than what global and regional CEOs believe. The second one is, as a strategic action, is to focus on upskilling the staff and improving their capabilities in dealing with new things, new technologies. This is more or less about practical things of the business. However, Nick already showed to you what are the biggest concerns for CEO at global and Central Eastern European level. Now look at the Romanian one. Pandemic crisis is number one in Romania too. The funny thing is that last time when a question about pandemic concern was raised, it was in 2016. Do you know what was the place that the CEOs ranked this potential pandemic crisis? It was 29th in terms of concerns. 29. 5 years after, number one. So you never know what's ahead of you tomorrow. Now, while for global, the cyber attacks and data protection is the second biggest concern, for Central Eastern Europe, given the fact that we are close to a conflictual area, the biggest concern is around geopolitical change, foreign exchange volatility. But we as Romanians, we don't have this problem. We don't have these problems, these are their problems. What we are concerned of, we are concerned with that concept of stability and predictability, because the next 4 items are in relation with the lack of confidence in the ability of the government to maintain constant public policies. Whether this is about tax policy uncertainty, whether there is concern about increasing tax burden, whether it's about policy uncertainty or over-regulation, all this with concern about stability and predictability. And you all know what the respondent CEOs are concerned about. Now, there is one last slide which I want to share with you. There was a question to the CEOs about what do you think should be the top 3 priorities of the government in the next 12 months. And then the second question was about what do you think as a CEO, as a company do to help the government address certain top priority issues. Interesting thing for Romania, the top 3 areas that the CEOs believe the government should focus on, 71% of them believe that the Romanian government should properly address the tax policy. And I have to give credit to the current government which said they will not increase taxes because they do not want to hamper the economic growth. So well done. But the second ones deal with the adequate physical digital infrastructure, as well as a skilled, educated, and adaptable workforce. But when you see, and this is where I wanted to tell you, when you look at the areas in which business could work with the government, on the tax policies, only 51% of the CEOs believe they can do something about the tax policy. 71% believe you should do something, but only 51% they believe they can do something. In other words, you should call us. Call us and we will help you with the tax policy. Or me, maybe. Now, the same thing with adequate physical and digital infrastructure. 68% believe it's a matter of the government, and 63% of the CEOs believe they can help. So it's pretty more there. But when it comes to the skilled workforce, 63% of the CEOs believe they can help the government to address this priority, even though it's a top priority only for 61%. So when it comes to the workforce, there is a real concern, and you want to get involved in making this environment better. Now, this is what I wanted to share with you. I believe it is a very good tool to measure, to take the pulse of where Romania goes. I want to thank you once again for contributing to this survey, and I encourage you, those who did not participate but received such an invitation, to take this survey next time, because it can prove a valuable tool for you to understand what is the future ahead of us. Thank you. Fini.
Ionuț, mulțumesc frumos. Thank you very much. Why do you think Romanians and of course the CEO of Romanian companies are so optimistic?
Because
and why Romanian was so resilient in this crisis?
well, two questions. Yeah.
And we start the panel.
Yeah. Why Romanians are so optimistic? You need to understand the nature of the Romanian people. You know what's the difference between an optimistic and a pessimistic? The optimistic, which are definitely not Romanians, the optimistic will say it cannot be worse than that. But we as a nation, we are very pessimistic, and we always say, oh yes, it can. Oh yes, it can. Hence, we were prepared for worse. Now it turned out not to be that. And there is one thing about Romanians. Romanians are always very resilient. They know how to survive. Unfortunately, they don't know how to prevail.
Thank you. Christine? Why Romanians are so optimistic right now? And why Romania was so resilient in this crisis?
Yeah, so firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and the invitation. So I'm just a new visitor, 3 years in, but I think pride myself of being living around the world and seeing many different cultures. And I do believe in this resilience. It's quite incredible. And to me, it's also about determination. I think that's in there too. I understand the pessimistic versus the optimistic as well, but I think there's just a general determination that exists in the culture to really be able to see things through. And I think the culture and the economy has been through many challenges and actually did very well in the last financial crisis compared to others, and it's proven itself here as well. So it's building itself a track record, and with that should come some belief as well and confidence with it. Yeah, I think the real question we now have is, okay, now how do we turn that resilience in the opportunity to thrive, would be the word I would use, and now how do we make sure that we can thrive as an economy going forward?
Sergio, thank you.
I guess it's the same question, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. I think it's just because the people who build businesses with passion or running businesses with passion refuse to throw the towel. They refuse to be the prisoners of, the pandemic is here, I'm going to throw the towel and I'm going to run away. I think the level of knowledge, maturity, superiority of the products they were bringing in the market, and not only in Romania, was actually very, very important to them. But the most important thing were the people they were working with them. And I think that because of that, they didn't throw the towel. And as so you know that I speak out of my heart, the rain is starting.
Okay, no rain. Nikos? Nick? The same question.
Same question. I think resilience is actually a really important word when it comes to this, right? So what I talked about earlier is that we were very clear, I think, in Romania and elsewhere what we wanted to achieve around this, right? So we wanted to make sure that we protected our people. I think that was clear. That was a real priority everywhere, both for governments and I think for businesses. And we wanted to make sure that we protected their employment. And I think that was also a very, very important part, as I mentioned, to ensuring the structural stability of the economy and of the businesses going forward, right? So that we have the opportunity to come out of this even stronger, right? When we talk about leveraging the experience that we've had. be it working remotely or organizing workflows, right? And leveraging the talent that we have. And I think that's probably part of why we're optimistic, because we've seen that we've retained that talent, we've learned a lot, we see a lot of opportunities around digitalization and automation. So from that perspective, I think that's really important, that, and we've seen it through the survey, we recognize that and we're looking at different ways of harnessing that, right? I think it's been a real catalyst for that sort of change. But I think resilience overall is really important. And I say that in the context of, if you look beyond Central Europe and you look to the more western parts of Europe, maybe it's a bit extreme view to say this, but people have been spoiled in certain parts of Western Europe, right? And the state has stepped in and it's provided protection for people, and there's a real reluctance to go back to work. Whereas I think in our part of the world, maybe we couldn't afford to do that, but we've been much more resilient, and I think we're ready to go now as things open up. Whereas you see all sorts of examples of people not wanting to come back to work. Apple employees writing to, they're probably one of the most, how would I say, coddled and spoiled employees, within the context of the Apple or the Facebook or whatever. And you've protected them, and you need something from them now, and there's a struggle to get that. I don't see that in Central Europe. I see that resilience where people want to get back to the office, they want to get back to work, and they want to experience this new way of working, whatever that may be, right? And they want to be upskilled, and so I think that generates a level of excitement that creates that optimism. Yeah.
In previous crisis, Poland was a clear winner in this part of the Europe, and of course in whole Europe. Do you think Romanian can have the same path?
Yeah, I think it was probably slightly different in the last crisis, because the last crisis, Poland benefited because it had a very large internal market, right? So it was a very large population, and the market was quite evolved, and so they were at that right level of development, that they were able to sustain themselves through a crisis that really shut off a lot of global exports and so on. I think when we look at this crisis, it's quite different, because the impact on economies, while is extreme and negative, it's certainly, how would I say, concentrated in certain industries and certain areas, right? Maybe Romania hasn't been as exposed to some of those things, like if you look at Austria, for example, with tourism, right, and travel. I mean, that's a massive impact, so it has to open up and so on. With countries like Romania and some of our other territories, the opportunities have increased, because with remote working, for example, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, if you don't want to come into the office and you can work from home for a year, well then maybe we'll get somebody in China to do that, or we'll get somebody in India to do that. But we can certainly do a lot of that out of Romania, we can do a lot of that out of Poland still as well, and so on. So we've seen the advent of a lot of shared delivery center setups and so on. So going back to resilience, but there's also tremendous strength in terms of the capabilities of our people, the education, the resourcefulness, and so on. So I think that Romania can absolutely thrive. The situation is different. I think in the last crisis, if you were manufacturing based and export based, it was more of a challenge. But now I think all of us here can leverage the great capabilities that we have in our workforce.
A short answer. When was your first time when you heard about Zoom? It was in January, February, March. The Zoom, this whole system. What is Zoom?
I think I would probably have been February. I think it would have been February, yeah, that I would have used Zoom, started to use Zoom.
Sergio?
The same, actually, from our cybersecurity team, who said I'm forbidden to use it. So.
Ionuț?
I think I heard something before, but then the first thing I heard that is forbidden to use it. So.
Nick?
Yeah, the same.
The same,
probably
forbidden,
later,
yeah.
but yeah, you can't use it. Yeah.
Okay. Most CEO in Romanian and global estimate growth of their company revenue and number of people. Do you appreciate it as a realistic expectation? If yes, what will be the driver for this growth?
Can you say it again? I missed it.
Okay. Most CEO in Romania and globally estimate growth of their companies, revenue, and number of people, number of employers. Do you appreciate it as a realistic expectation? Do you intend to hire more people in Petrom?
So I think, so for me, I would say yes, because I think if you look at Romania and you look at the GDP estimates, it's clear that there is going to be growth. And many investors, we're a listed company, and so we talk to many of the capital markets around the world that are investing in Central Eastern Europe and also in Romania. And it is that growth and that growth that underpins it. And I think actually what we saw during the pandemic is actually the decrease in GDP was not as extreme as we originally thought. And actually the projections continue to get stronger going forward. So the underlying GDP of the economy is a foundational aspect for most businesses here. So absolutely yes. In the oil and gas sector, yes, because when people start moving, if there's more mobility, then actually we see more demand for product. So we see an increase in demand for fuels, an increase in demand as well for gas, an increase in demand for power. So from our perspective, both the GDP and the growth and the demand for product we see as growing. So yes, I would say yes.
Sergio?
Well, I think yes, but with a little bit of color on the headline, in the sense that I believe that the name of the game for the next 10 years is change, and it's about the structure of the revenue, it's about the structure of the workforce, and it's about changing of a company from measuring output to measuring impact. I think our business models are changing as we speak and will continue to change. And we will have an enormous amount of stimulus actually coming in terms of our need to change, from consumer behaviors to sustainability, from digitization and technology to basically expectation of the workforce. And here I believe the reason for I say with a color, I believe that we need to invest immediately of yesterday in actually creating some clear KPIs for the Romanian market, as we are talking about Romania, in terms of actually what are we going to do with the human capital index. You asked about Poland, and I tell you that unfortunately, leaving aside the base effects and the structural potential impetus we may have from the different places where the economy actually restarts, the difference in the human capital index between Romania and Poland is round about 40%. We are at 0.58, Poland is at 0.75, which is the European average. With the human capital index at 0.58, actually our ability to create potential is not there. So yes, I believe we are going to see a lot going on, and I believe we are going to grow, and I believe we will be able to hire more. But about the sustainability of our business models, and this is a question which I believe everybody globally is asking, I think we need to think a little bit more about that, because I think we are not building a companies or society for the next 4 quarters reporting, but maybe for more than that.
Thank you. What will be your expectation with regard to the fiscal policy in the next period in Romania? I put this question because in Romanian, CEO ranks the uncertainty of fiscal policy and the increase of the fiscal burden among the top 5 threats to economic growth. So, what will be your expectation to the fiscal policy? Okay.
Okay, so I'll do that. Our expectation is actually clarity.
Clarity.
Clarity, right. It's about clarity and predictability. We are not here to discuss if it's X or Y as a number. This is a matter of policy of the Romanian state who understand its priorities and what it takes to be competitive. What I expect is actually a very clear split of a burden so that the matters like human capital index or capital investments are being definitely encouraged. And I also expect that the work itself is taxed symmetrically with other types of taxes. But all in, I expect for any business owner or business manager, so to say, to find it very easy to navigate through the fiscal, let's say, maze. This is, I think, the first expectation I would have, and the rest as regards numbers, high or lows, as I said, I always have faith in the Romanian government.
Christine?
So I would emphasize one point and then build on another one. So I think stability, predictability, just this is fundamental, I think, that any investor is looking for to understand. The less predictable, the more volatile, the more risk, the more cautious we are as investors. I strongly believe in that. So I reiterate Sergio's point there with regards to predictability on that. In particular, with regards to oil and gas, which generally is a very, very high taxpayer, one of the highest taxpayers in it. For us in particular, we will look for changes to the offshore law, which is fundamentally about competitiveness and fiscal competitiveness is one particular component to that. So in that regard, it is an expectation on fiscal policy to see a competitive fiscal environment to be able to develop the Black Sea. This is one thing we need.
Ionuț, why do you think the CEOs in Romania put fiscal policy in the top priorities?
Because of the uncertainty. I mean, you don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. That ordinance 114 really created such an amount of distress. It was not about the size of tax, whatever that was, but you don't know what to expect tomorrow. And then once you have a business plan and then next day you have to go and say, well, has changed, then this creates a lot of lack of trust in investing in Romania.
Nick, why do you think in Romanian the people, the CEO, are afraid about fiscal policy? It's not the same matter as in Poland or Hungary or other country in region?
Well, I think it's very high in every territory, and it moves around from year to year. And that I think you probably need to look at what Ionuț mentioned earlier, which is the level of trust between CEOs and the government around fiscal policy, and at times that gets breached, right? And it's very hard to rebuild that. So that to me is probably one of the clear factors. If there's a breach of trust, then there's going to be a greater concern about that stability. But you know, all of the points that are made are absolutely valid. The only thing I would add to it is that the government and the regulator needs to have courage to be able to have, you know, to provide that clarity, provide that stability, and ensure that in the longer, mid to long term, the outcome is the right one, rather than looking for short-term gain that will damage the fabric of investment and businesses. Yeah.
And the last question: 85% of the CEO in Romania say they will invest in digitalization in the next 3 years. What does digital transformation mean to you? Is this the area in which you intend to invest, and why?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if we actually stand back and just look at, I mean, at least for our company, the ability to put 5,000 people working from home and make sure that everything continues to manage is actually a phenomenal transformation for us, you know. And I think we would never been able to drive that transformation on its own. It's a journey we were going on, but we would never been able to do it without this situation. I think of it as the silver lining in the cloud, actually, to be able to have done this. To the amount of digital signatures now, I mean, compared to how much paper I used to have, is just phenomenal. And my team talks about how much faster, therefore, decisions get made and papers don't get stuck and bureaucracy. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, it's just something very simple on this. So I think the momentum this has created is phenomenal. And it's forced people to get their digital skills better. You know, whereas before, was it voluntary or not? And for those of us of slightly older generation, you had to be forced a little bit. But the momentum is there, and I think this is a phenomenal change of it. So, but then I highlight maybe just one component for us with regards to, okay, we may want to do more, but where do we need help from a government? Just as an example, We deal with a lot of geological data, and geological can be classified, it can be confidential, has many different categories that doesn't allow it to go in the cloud. If you can't put your data in the cloud, you can't work these days. You can't function these days. You lose a lot of these opportunities. So it's a big push that we're making, which is, okay, please, can we get this data rules changed, which are changed in the EU, but not changed yet here in Romania. So again, this is, I think, an example of we want to go faster, but we need some help from the government to do it.
Sergiu?
Thank you. Look, I mean, the question, what does it, do we believe in digital transformation? Yes, we do believe in it, and yes, we are investing in it, and yes, we will continue to invest in it. What does it mean to us, digital transformation? Well, it means culture, education, and data. I insist on what I said a little bit earlier. It's about change. Digitizing the way we did business yesterday is not digital transformation. It's efficiency. We will need together state actors, private actors, to think how the business model of the future will look like and actually start massively turning around the education landscape we have in Romania. We are starting from a good point, I think, with the 6th largest population in tertiary education in the ITNC. But transformation is not only ITNC, it's much more than that. The real problem is that we have the lowest cohort from all, in gross terms, in Europe in tertiary education. That actually kills our potential. And our job, again, is to create potential for the next 5, 10, 15 years for our country. And this is it. Thank you.
Nick?
Yeah, Yanut asked me to be brief because he said it's raining, but digitalization, as I said, there's been a catalyst through the pandemic, but there's a number of aspects to this. One is that the efficiency part that Sergio talked about, right? But it's something that our people are demanding of us as well, right? Because they want to work digitally, they want to work differently, and our clients are demanding it of us as well. So I think there's how would I say, a natural sort of demand being built up, and now there's a catalyst to drive it forward. So I expect, we're committed $4 billion, I think, globally to digitally upskill our people and to digitize. So if you don't, you're going to be left behind if you're not keeping pace with this. There's no question about it.
Okay, thank you very much for your presence in this panel. Before I pass the microphone to Ionut, who will win the European Championship?
Definitely not Hungary.
Well, I watched Hungary play. I'm half Irish, half Hungarian, and I watched Ireland and Hungary playing last night. Ireland, they're not going to win because they're not in it. And on the basis of last night's match, I don't think Germany, France, or Portugal are particularly worried about the group matches against Hungary either.
Christine? You are not supporter of Great Britain or England? England, sorry.
I'll go nationalistic then, of course, and I will say England. So, but I was joking with someone that I just went through my traveling over the last couple of days, and I am now no longer an EU citizen, and I'm definitely feeling the implications of that. So, but I will continue to support England, of course.
Sergiu?
I will go with the strongest team, which is France.
France. Ionut?
Belgium.
Belgium. So, let's applaud. Thank you very much. Ionut, it's your turn.
We say, what did we discuss?